On today's episode,
Nicaragua, 1980s, the Iran-Contra scandal.
In the early 1980s, the U.S. was still in a Cold War with Russia, and anti-communist sentiment was strong.
The Reagan administration sold weapons to Iran, a country it publicly called a terrorist state, then used the profits to fund rebels in Nicaragua. Congress had explicitly banned both.
While $30 million had been allocated for the weapons, the CIA funneled a portion of that money to the Contras in Nicaragua.
So the CIA was heavily involved in the trafficking of crack into the United States, the crack epidemic.
After the scandal broke, one man quietly helped clean up the aftermath, Jeffrey Epstein.
You don't need a formal conspiracy when interests
The Iran-Contra affair. In the early 1980s, the U.S. was still in a Cold War with Russia, and anti-communist sentiment was strong. During his presidential campaign, Reagan promised to assist anti-communist insurgencies around the world. For a brief time under Reagan, the CIA trained and assisted groups fighting communist leaders abroad. Reagan was particularly interested in a group called the Contras and their battle in Nicaragua. The Contras were a group battling the Cuban-backed Sandinistas, a communist group who had seized power in 1979. Reagan called the Contras the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. But much of the Contras' funding came from the cocaine trade. Because of this, Congress passed the Bolin Amendment, specifically aimed at keeping American money from funding the group. That happened in 1982, shortly after Reagan took office. The amendment restricted the CIA and Department of Defense from using funds to provide military assistance to groups that were trying to overthrow Nicaragua's government, groups like the Contras. This didn't stop Reagan. The president told his national security advisor, Robert McFarlane, to help the Contras anyway, regardless of the cost. McFarlane found opportunity in Iran. In 1985, an Iranian-backed terrorist group held 7 American hostages in Lebanon. Reagan insisted his advisors find a way to bring the hostages home, saying, "I want you to do whatever you have to do to help these people keep body and soul together." So, with permission from Reagan, McFarlane made a deal. The U.S. would give Iran weapons, and Iran would broker the release of the hostages. This happened even though Reagan publicly insisted he would not negotiate with terrorists, and despite the fact that there was a trade embargo with Iran. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The deal with Iran didn't just secretly secure the release of the hostages in exchange for weapons. There was money involved. While $30 million had been allocated for the weapons, the CIA funneled a portion of that money to the Contras in Nicaragua, the group Reagan supported in their guerrilla fight against the Sandinista government. In 1986, the Lebanese newspaper Al-Shura reported the arms deal, and everything began to unravel. That prompted an investigation by the U.S. Attorney General, who discovered that only $12 million of the $30 million actually went toward weapons for Iran. The rest of the money was sent to the Contras in Nicaragua. The revelations were explosive. Reagan denied the allegations that he had negotiated with terrorists, but Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North came forward and acknowledged that he diverted funds to the Contras. North also said Reagan knew about it. North's testimony would inspire the press and Congress to launch investigations against Reagan for the rest of his presidency. Texas Senator John Tower led the investigation into the scandal. The Tower Commission determined it was Reagan's lack of oversight that allowed Iran-Contra to happen, but did not implicate Reagan directly. It wasn't until another congressional investigation in 1987 that Reagan finally testified. On May 5, 1987, joint hearings were televised investigating the covert arms deal with Iran and the assistance to Nicaragua. The hearings would go on for 41 days. Reagan was never charged, but McFarlane, Oliver North, 4 CIA officers, 5 government contractors, and Reagan's national security advisor, John Poindexter, were all found guilty. Yet, speculation about Reagan's involvement lingered on. Press investigations would go on for years to follow. While Reagan's image suffered a bit, he still left office with one of the highest approval ratings of any president in U.S. history.
That was a really fantastic overview of the Iran-Contra affair. I often get it confused with all of the drug smuggling that happened during this period of time as well. I recently did an episode on Gary Webb, who uncovered a lot of that story. I don't know when that'll drop, but it might have dropped already. If not, it will be dropping soon. And like I said, I often get these two confused, some of the details, because they all happened at the same time and they were all related to the Contras. So while the drug smuggling is not specifically involved in Iran-Contra, I still think it's closely related. And I think a lot of that drug money was going to the Contras to support counter-communist operations. But yeah, it's such a wild piece of history, and I think it's an important one because it's so recent, right? There's a lot of people alive today who remember Iran-Contra, who were adults, right? The boomers were young adults when this happened. I was born in '87, so this is the testimony. Reagan's testimony happened a couple of months before I was born. This is very recent history, and I think it's quite likely, while it's often talked about in terms of Reagan, it's quite likely that a lot of this was being pushed by Bush Sr., who was former head of the CIA, goes on to be president after this. He's likely the ringleader of a lot of this stuff. But it just goes to really demonstrate the lengths of which certain elements of our government will go to pursue their own objectives. And I think there's a much bigger conversation that I'm not going to get into in terms of why they're so opposed to communism. There is a much higher level conversation that happens there, and like I said, I don't want to go too much into that, but there's a reason. They're serving the capitalists, right? So regardless of how you feel about capitalism versus communism, we're not going to talk about that. If you're not capable of having critical conversations about these things, like, feel free to go somewhere else. But the reality is there are incentives for capitalists to continue to support the system of capitalism to this extent. Why would they do that? Just because capitalism is better for all of us, or is it because capitalism is really better for them, right? So keep that in mind. That's why these systems are in place within our government. That's why there are elements of the CIA who, if you look into the history of the CIA and Allen Dulles, have direct connections to all of these folks. That's really what this is about. But it's a fantastic example of the lengths of which these elements within our government are willing to go to, right? It doesn't matter if you pass laws. It doesn't matter who you voted into office. They're going to do this stuff anyways, guys. And so this is such an important piece of American history that doesn't get talked about enough.
If I may, the polls show that a lot of American people just simply don't believe you. But the one thing that you've had going for you more than anything else in your presidency, your credibility, has been severely damaged. Can you repair it? What does it mean for the rest of your presidency?
Well, I imagine I'm the only one around who wants to repair it, and I didn't have anything to do with damaging it.
I didn't have anything to do with damaging it. I tend to believe him, to be honest with you. I don't know how prominent of a figure Reagan really was in the Iran-Contra debacle, to be honest with you. I think a lot of this is driven by Bush Sr.
In 1986, the Iran-Contra scandal exploded into public view after a cargo plane was shot down over Nicaragua. The aircraft belonged to Southern Air Transport, a CIA front company used to move weapons in secret. After the scandal broke, one man quietly helped clean up the aftermath: Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein assisted in relocating Southern Air Transport's aircraft to a new base in Columbus, Ohio. The same planes that once carried arms to Nicaragua and Iran soon began servicing the retail empire of Leslie Wexner, the pro-Israel billionaire owner of Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie & Fitch. Just a few years later, in 1991, Wexner granted Epstein power of attorney over his vast fortune. The move came as Wexner was under scrutiny following the mafia-style murder of a lawyer connected to his company named Arthur Shapiro. Epstein's role in inheriting and repurposing the Southern Air Transport planes was just one of his many links tying him to the Iran-Contra network. He also moved in elite circles with major arms dealers like Adnan Khashoggi and Douglas Leese, figures known or alleged to have been involved in Iran-Contra. A recent profile of Epstein revealed another striking detail. During the 1980s, Epstein lived with John Stanley Pottinger, a figure who also played a key role in CIA-backed efforts to traffic weapons illegally to Iran. This story of Epstein, Iran-Contra, and hidden power is told through the trail of Southern Air Transport aircraft and private emails from Epstein's own leaked Yahoo inbox. You can read the full investigation on Dropsite News.
That's so interesting to hear. I don't think this is the first time I've heard this. I do think I've heard about Leslie Wexner's purchasing of the planes or something like that in the past, but not in a lot of detail. So it's so interesting to see Jeffrey Epstein's name pop up in relation to Iran-Contra. How wild is that?
So the CIA was heavily involved in the trafficking of crack into the United States, the crack epidemic. So I kind of wanted to explain that to you because it's actually very politically motivated. So to understand this wild decision, you definitely need to know a little bit about the Cold War. So we're going to start with the Iran-Contra affair because that's definitely one of the precursors to this. So Ronald Reagan was president and he was absolutely obsessed with communism, and not in the good way. He was just like, it is a national security threat. It is not just a different economic system. He was a heavy believer in domino theory. So it was basically this theory that, like, if one country became communist, that the neighboring countries would eventually also become communist and they would fall like dominoes. He was scared that if communism ended up spreading anywhere in like Central or South America, that it could eventually threaten North America. So in 1979, there was a left-wing revolutionary group called the Sandinistas. They overthrew Nicaragua's longtime United States-backed dictator. His name was Somoza. So the Reagan administration saw the new Sandinista government as basically like another Soviet or Cuban ally in the Western Hemisphere. So like absolutely could not happen. So to oppose the Sandinistas, the United States secretly began supporting an anti-communist rebel group called the Contras. The CIA actually helped organize them, train them, support them financially as a part of a Cold War strategy. So the conflict continues, but then rising reports of Contra fighters committing serious human rights abuses against people, like torture, kidnappings, executions. Congress hears about it. So they pass a series of laws called the Boland Amendments, which restricted the U.S. government legally. They could not fund the Contras military campaign. Like, they were not allowed to give any more to the Contras. The Reagan administration was like, we'll just do it in secret. So instead, officials inside the White House, more specifically Oliver North, worked with a small network to keep funding the Contras anyway. So the United States government, even though we're publicly enemies with Iran and we have an arms embargo against Iran, meaning American weapons were not supposed to be legally sold to the Iranian government. Secretly, however, the members of the Reagan administration arranged for weapons to be sold to Iran anyway. So we give Iran all these weapons. They give us cash. The money is moved through basically a series of middlemen and offshore bank accounts. It finally reaches this Saudi businessman. He throws it in a secret bank account. I think it was like a Switzerland bank account before it ultimately reaches the rebel forces in Nicaragua, the Contras. The entire operation was designed to keep the money flowing to the Contras in secret because Congress was prohibiting the United States from funding their military campaign. The operation stayed secret until '86. There was a Lebanese newspaper article that just blew up the whole thing. They were like, hey, we found out that there's weapons going to Iran. And we were like, oh shit. Yeah, congressional investigations, the whole thing blows up, and that becomes known as the Iran-Contra affair. So, question being, if the secret pipeline to funding the Contras collapsed, how were the Contras continuing to finance their war? So the investigators go down a darker path involving Contra-linked cocaine trafficking and the crack epidemic, and whether United States agencies knew far more than they admitted. So first clue comes out of Los Angeles. Los Angeles got hit the hardest, and that is where the crack epidemic essentially started. So during the 1980s, federal investigators start uncovering these large cocaine trafficking networks, all with individuals with ties to the Contras that are connected to it. One of the most significant figures that I can think of off the top of my head would be Danilo Blandon. He was a Nicaraguan who later admitted that he had raised money for the Contra movement by selling cocaine in the United States. Blandon was a supplier for Freeway Rick Ross, one of the biggest drug dealers in all of LA during the crack epidemic. So that's how the crack epidemic starts. That's how it spreads. So as crack spread throughout all American cities, investigators are like, okay, this is not just organized crime. What the F is this? So over the next several years, there's congressional investigators, journalists, federal agencies. They're all uncovering evidence that numerous Contra-linked individuals have participated in cocaine trafficking. The 1989 Senate Foreign Relations Committee report concluded that people who supported the Contras had been involved in drug trafficking, and that in some cases, money generated from those trafficking operations helped finance the Contra war effort. In other words, at least some of the profits from the cocaine trafficking was being used for the same rebel force that Reagan administration was trying to keep alive. So they keep investigating. They also find evidence that U.S. government agencies were receiving reports about the Contra-linked drug trafficking while this covert war was underway. Actually, the CIA's Inspector General acknowledged that we had relationships with these individuals and these organizations connected to the Contras, despite the allegations of drug trafficking. And to put it lightly, in some instances, did not aggressively pursue or report these allegations to law enforcement. Danilo Blandon actually himself became a government informant and received a substantially reduced sentence, despite admitting he basically helped create the crack epidemic and trafficked large-scale cocaine in all of the United States. Federal prosecutors actually obtained a court order limiting Freeway Rick Ross's defense from pursuing certain CIA-related questioning of Blandon at trial. So federal officers weren't just aware of this trafficking, they were protecting it. And the journalist that dropped the story, his name was Gary Webb. If I can't get you to do anything with this information, please go read his story. Dark Alliance by Gary Webb. Here's the link to read it online for free. It is the only source I can provide you with that is so in-depth. Like, it talks about the Iran-Contra affair, Contra-linked cocaine trafficking, the CIA, the investigations that followed, court proceedings, like everything. And weirdly enough, actually, when he dropped the story, the world was shocked, but there were certain news outlets that, weirdly enough, had connections to the CIA that were trying to discredit him. And it actually ruined his career. The newspaper that he worked for ended up having to pull back and drop a redacted version, and then he ended up resigning because of all of the controversy surrounding it. In 2004, he was found with 2 gunshot wounds to the back of his head, and it was ruled a suicide. And I think that's where I'm going to end my video. I'm going to let you come to your own conclusions on that. Thank you.
It's Kayla Jaden on TikTok. We've watched a bunch of her stuff at this point. I really like this gal. Does phenomenal content. Can't recommend her enough. I'm sure she's much bigger than I am, so I'm probably riding her coattails a little bit here. She's got 80,000 likes on this TikTok alone, 1,500 comments, 13,000 saves. So obviously has tremendous reach, but credit where credit's due. Like I said, like her a lot. Go check her out. Does a fantastic job. You know, the Iran-Contra stuff. I said this earlier, I think in one of the earlier TikToks in this episode. I'm going to move some of these around so that it makes a little bit more sense. So I don't know where I said it exactly in this video, but point being, I have commented that the Iran-Contra affair is closely related to the Gary Webb story and the selling of cocaine on American streets and the crack epidemic before as well, because they are so closely related. Well, when you talk about Iran-Contra and what it means from the strictest definition, it does not necessarily include the drug trafficking stuff. I think it's silly not to include it because it's so closely affiliated. Because at the end of the day, it's all revolving around the Contras and anti-communist operations. So that's really what is driving all of this, whether it be guns for money in Iran or crack cocaine on American streets. It's all being driven by Sandinistas v. Contras in Nicaragua at this time, and more broadly speaking, the Cold War and capitalism versus communism. And frankly, I believe that that's driven by a lot more of power and where it lies and who it lies with, rather than actual economic systems. But that's a conversation for another day. So I really appreciate that she's making this connection. And I think she did overall a phenomenal job. There are so many details, and I can't do a very good job of this. But I do think one of the things that she might be getting wrong here, and I could be wrong myself, is the Iran guns for money thing. I think the gentleman who did the overview at the beginning of this video does a better job of that. It seems to be that the money was not provided by Iran, but us, and then a portion of it was siphoned off and went to the Contras instead of to Iran, where it was supposed to go. So that's for the hostages. So it's not just guns for money type of thing with Iran. It's a little bit more than that, but this is so complicated. Iran-Contra is so complicated, happens over many, many years. It's an extremely nuanced story with so many different layers and pieces that it's really difficult to get it right just off the top of your head, like she's doing here. And I think overall she did a fantastic job. But like I said, I do just want to mention that there are some nuanced details there that she might not have hit perfectly. But overall, this is a great, great overview. And I really like the fact that she's connecting it to Gary Webb's story. There's a reason I'm doing Iran-Contra right now. I recently dropped an episode about Gary Webb, so I wanted to include the Iran-Contra component as well, because I do also, like Kayla, see them very much connected.
Nicaragua, 1980s, the Iran-Contra scandal. This is how the U.S. illegally funded a secret war, by selling weapons to its enemy. In the 1980s, the U.S. government wanted to overthrow the left-wing Sandinista government in Nicaragua, but Congress had passed a law, the Boland Amendment, banning U.S. aid to the rebels, known as the Contras. So Reagan's team broke the law. They sold weapons to Iran, a country the U.S. had publicly labeled a terrorist state, and used the money to secretly fund the Contras. It was called the Iran-Contra affair, a full-blown scandal. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North shredded documents. Reagan claimed he didn't remember. Dozens were indicted. Most were pardoned. The result? Thousands dead in Nicaragua. And a message to the world. America's enemies might be its business partners if the money's right. They say it was complicated. We say it was criminal. Follow Learn Things Now to see how deep it really goes.
I'm not the biggest fan of these channels. Obviously, it's not some type of AI channel, I think. But not that I'm super bearish on AI. I use AI myself for all my thumbnails. I make them and then feed it through AI. I think it can be useful, but I prefer channels like Kayla's. But I wanted to watch this to get another overview. Again, I think this is missing the hostages piece. I am not super clear or an expert on the Iran-Contra affair by any means, so I could be wrong. It could be as simple as we sold guns to Iran to fund the Contras, but I'm pretty sure there's a hostage component in all of this. There were American hostages being held by Iran, and there's something that they play a role in this, and I can't recall what it is exactly. Like I said, there was an overview done earlier in this video that talks about that detail, but it didn't go into great detail about where the money to pay for the hostages came from. So still a little unclear. Like I said, this is so detailed and layered and nuanced that it really requires a deeper look. And I think I'm going to be looking into Gary Webb later this month, and probably looking into Iran-Contra in more detail as well.
Iran-Contra affair. The Reagan administration sold weapons to Iran, a country it publicly called a terrorist state, then used the profits to fund rebels in Nicaragua. Congress had explicitly banned both. When caught, they shredded the evidence. The Contras were Nicaraguan guerrillas fighting the leftist Sandinista government. Reagan called them the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. Congress disagreed and passed the Boland Amendment, making it illegal to fund them. Reagan told his National Security Council to keep the Contras alive anyway, body and soul. Meanwhile, Hezbollah was holding 7 American hostages in Lebanon. Reagan's team hatched a plan: sell missiles to Iran, which backed Hezbollah, use Iran's influence to free the hostages, and funnel the profits to the Contras. One illegal operation would finance another. Over 1,500 missiles went to Iran. 3 hostages were released, and 3 more were taken. When a Lebanese magazine exposed the scheme in November 1980, Iran-Contra affair. The Reagan administration sold weapons to Iran, a country it publicly called a terrorist state, then used the profits to fund rebels in Nicaragua. Congress had explicitly banned both. When caught, they shredded the evidence. The Contras were Nicaraguan guerrillas fighting the leftist Sandinista government. Reagan called them the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. Congress disagreed and passed the Boland Amendment, making it illegal to fund them. Reagan told his National Security Council to keep the Contras alive anyway, body and soul. Meanwhile, Hezbollah was holding 7 American hostages in Lebanon. Reagan's team hatched a plan: sell missiles to Iran, which backed Hezbollah, use Iran's influence to free the hostages, and funnel the profits to the Contras. One illegal operation would finance another. Over 1,500 missiles went to Iran. 3 hostages were released, and 3 more were taken. When a Lebanese magazine exposed the scheme in November 1986, Reagan went on national television and denied everything. A week later, he admitted the arms sales but insisted it wasn't arms for hostages. Attorney General Edwin Meese then revealed the Contra connection. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the operations architect, shredded so many documents he jammed the White House shredder. His secretary smuggled classified papers out in her boots and dress. 14 officials were charged. Most were pardoned by George Bush, who had been vice president during the scandal. Nobody served significant prison time.
Yeah, so again, I tend to like these little stick figure videos a little bit more, even though, I don't know, these might be AI as well, but I like these better. This channel and channels like this often, I think, do a pretty good explanation. And this dropped a little bit more context for me in terms of how the hostages play a role. It seems like the hostage thing might be more of a tertiary element of this story, and it really is just selling weapons to Iran to fund the Contras. I think that at a high level, that's what the narrative is really about, and the hostage piece of it is a little bit smaller and maybe just some sort of an excuse to get involved when they got caught. So it seems to be more about just selling weapons to Iran to get money. And yeah, the piece I really want to talk about here is just the destruction of the documents and the fact that no one really got in trouble for this. That the next president, who was George Bush Sr., Reagan's VP, who was also probably significantly involved in this whole thing, considering the fact that he was former director of the CIA, must have been aware that this was going on, probably involved in it. Severe anti-communist himself. The idea that he's not involved is a little silly. And then he comes around, gets elected president, and pardons everyone. So this is a demonstration of your government shredding documents, trying to cover it up, engaging in illegal activity against the law, but against, this express regulations of Congress, taking action to cover it up, destroying documentation, sneaking documentation out of the White House, and then when they get caught, making sure all of their co-conspirators are protected and don't get punished. How much more of an example do you need for you to understand that this is the type of thing that they engage in often, and that this isn't the first time, nor is it the last? And I think establishing these facts in the instances in history in which we know the facts and it's proven can help you see where it might be happening today. And that's why I really like focusing on these elements of, sort of conspiracies, as opposed to, flat earth and hollow moon and stuff, is these things are real and they have real implications that can help you understand the world as it is today. Anyways, I'm going to end it there for today. Iran-Contra is just so deep and nuanced and detailed, and one of the most important periods of American history, at least recent American history, in my opinion. And we're definitely going to be looking at it in more detail alongside the Gary Webb story, because I think these two are so closely connected that they should be done together. So I'm going to be trying to find a really good documentary on the Dark Alliance story, Gary Webb's story. We'll be doing that first. And then to complement that, we'll be doing some deep dives into some type of documentary around Iran-Contra. So I want to look at both of these in a lot more detail. I want to start taking notes on these. I want to start looking at the direct evidence, collecting those sources so I can curate this stuff for you guys and make it a little bit more accessible, both for myself, but anyone else who's interested as well. I want to be able to talk about this in a more authoritative manner. And when folks who are not as well educated about these things challenge you on these ideas, have the resources ready to go. So that's really an aspiration that I have for this channel, is maybe we can create some type of website that is a dumping ground for notes, links, primary sources, evidence, etc. That when you're talking about these things, you can quickly and easily pull this stuff up and go, hey, I'm not making this up. Here's the evidence, right? And if this channel can have any benefit to anyone out there beyond just entertainment value, that's what I'd like it to be. So that is very much an aspirational direction, and it may take very long, if ever, to get there. But it's a direction I'd like to start moving in. So we may start that with the Gary Webb story. So as I go through that documentary, you'll see me probably stopping, taking notes, trying to do it live on camera, doing the research, not just taking the documentary at its word, but verifying the evidence, identifying where it is, making that available to myself and the audience, you guys, more easily, more accessible, and reading it and analyzing the evidence for myself and drawing my own conclusions and seeing if they line up with the narrative that's being pushed in whatever documentary we're watching. So I really want to start taking it in that direction in order to get through a whole story like Dark Alliance and Iran-Contra. Is probably a bit lofty to do all in August. I'm doing this because Gary Webb Day is on August 31st. So this seems like an appropriate time to dive into this topic. But it may take us into September to get through all of this stuff. But anyways, that is the plan as far as Gary Webb and Iran-Contra go. This will be a topic that we are talking about for quite a while over the next couple of months. So be ready for that. Hopefully you find it interesting. To me, it's one of the most interesting periods of recent American history. All that being said, if you enjoyed today's video, please drop me a like. Subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with more of what we're doing here. Like I said, all of the support and engagement means the world to me, and you guys are a critical component of this whole thing. So if you're interested in getting the ground floor and helping me shape some of where this channel is going to go, I'd love that collaboration. So feel free to subscribe, drop me some comments. I try to reply to every comment that I get. I don't have enough right now, so I can make that commitment while we're still small. But help me grow it, and like I said, you'll be an integral component of what we're building here. So I welcome the collaboration. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments on Iran-Contra, drop them down below. Love to hear it. With that being said, thanks guys. We'll be back next time with another.